Using dissection to teach biology in schools is as crazy as thinking you should fire a gun to learn about wars in American history. You don't, but they do. Cut up dead animals in class like they're a school supply and not a one-time living thing. How PETA continues to fight dissection in schools. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, the woman in charge of cutting up dissection.
Part of our job is to get people to care about animals just in general. And I think that one of the hurdles that we face with an issue like animal dissection is that people argue, well, these animals were already dead. So they sort of, dismiss any animal rights or animal welfare concerns. But the fact is that the animals were living at one time, and many of them were specifically killed for classroom dissection. So that is, something that we always strive to get that message out there to people who, again, may not even be aware that this is still an issue. Just, hey, animals are being killed for classroom dissection. This is not, just a harmless, quote unquote, activity.
PETA's Samantha Suiter is the manager of science education. She'll talk about dissection and how you can make a moral choice for the animals next on the PETA Podcast. But first, thanks again for joining us here at the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with friends. Let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. And if you just found us, welcome. And keep binging. There's lots to listen to on the PETA Podcast. Listen to PETA President Ingrid Newkirk on episode 1 and episode 73. Going to a baseball game? You don't have to skip the hot dogs when they're vegan. The top vegan food at ballparks in America on episode 70. And dissection is the first step toward vivisection. Listen who won our Vivisector of the Month award on episode 69. Remember, if you're on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps the algorithm know that PETA has a podcast on the issues important to you. There's also a link to a survey in our show notes. If you're so inclined, we'd love to hear your feedback. Now, if you really want to help the animals, you can always hit the Donate Now button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. For vivisectors, it's pretty basic. Dissection, the cutting up of animals. But is it an effective learning tool? When was the last time a math teacher brought out a slide rule or an abacus? Yet outdated dissection hangs in there in science classes around the world. Not if Samantha Suiter has her way. As the manager in charge of science education, Suiter says the technology has already eclipsed dissection. There's no way students should cut animals unless they've been totally desensitized to being empathetic toward animals. Here's PETA's Sam Suiter on the problems with dissection on the PETA Podcast. You do all this great stuff, and what is your title, Sam?
So I'm the manager of science education at PETA.
The manager of science education. This is in all of the world or just in the United States?
So I'm actually not sure if there are other managers of science education at the international affiliates, but I think I may be the only one. It's certainly possible. And I do interact with our international affiliates as well and help them, with dissection related issues.
Well, this is quite a responsibility. That means if someone's out there cutting up a frog or cutting up something that they shouldn't be cutting up, you're going to raise the red flag and say, citizens alert, right? That would be you.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're going to say this is not necessary. It's, very archaic. There are much better ways to learn science. So that is certainly my job.
So it's got to be kind of I, I would think that it's fairly daunting because there's got to be millions of people out there who haven't gotten the word, and they're probably out there dissecting a frog or something like that now, right?
I find very often that people who are not closely affiliated with a school, so if they're not a teacher, not a parent, they generally don't even know that this is still a thing. They remember, folks my age, folks your age, certainly remember when, animal dissection was, a part of their own personal schooling, but people are shocked to learn that it's still happening.
Yeah, I remember specifically the smell of a jar, seeing an animal in a jar, right? And then having the teacher open up the jar, and there it is, the smell of the formaldehyde. Do they still have formaldehyde out there, or have they banned that yet?
No, animals are still initially preserved in formaldehyde, and it's a huge concern because that what you're smelling is the molecules of formaldehyde in the air going up your nose, and so it's a huge safety issue for students and teachers.
So that explains what happened to me. There I was in fourth grade, thinking, okay, the teacher's telling me to open up this salamander that's in a jar. I'm opening it up. There's the smell of the formaldehyde, and of course you put it in on this tray. They give it this rubberized tray, and be it salamanders or another species that is really huge in the dissection world is the flatworm, right? Everyone uses flatworms for some reason. They're like, why is that?
I think actually segmented worms are the sort of gateway for, many teachers to get students, sort of desensitized to the fact that these are animals. So the small worms are usually the first being that students dissect. And that sometimes happens at a very young age. It could be elementary school. It could be middle school.
Yeah, I was in fourth grade when I did my first, I did the salamanders in fifth. So I must have done the flatworms in fourth grade. And then also in high school biology, they kept using the flatworms. So I mentioned this because these are all personal experiences. And I thought really dissection was something from the 60s and maybe the 70s, and it was long gone. And, my kids were never required to do any of that. So I'm kind of shocked to hear that are people still using flatworms and, these segmented worms and salamanders and things like that?
Unfortunately, yes. And, the practice of animal dissection hasn't changed in 100 years. So the same sort of, hands-on cutting apart a preserved animal, reeking of formaldehyde, that process has not changed in a century. But not only are worms and, amphibians dissected, also cats and minks and, cow eyes and sheep brains and many, many other organs and whole animals are being dissected still today.
When you say dissection, and let's just go into education mode here. What exactly is dissection, and what is the range of animals? You mentioned from flatworms to minks?
All the way to minks and cats and, several other large mammals such as pigs. There is no species that is off the table, sadly. So for educational purposes, generally speaking, animals are being dissected to teach anatomy, either for comparative anatomy purposes or simply for the sake of learning the anatomy of a frog, say, for example. And, back when we were in school, we didn't have computers. I'll tattle on myself a bit as far as my age, but we didn't have, we didn't have computers, so there was no option. Nowadays, we have these amazing Merge Cube virtual reality cube thing that work with your iPhone app. And, we have digital dissection, and we have so much wonderful technology that it's really almost insane to think that, people are still archaically cutting apart, preserved frogs in a classroom. It doesn't make sense.
So dissection, if we dissect the word, it means to literally cut up, right? Dissect?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and educationally speaking, the goal or the course objective is never physical dissection. So the course objective will say something like, learn the circulatory system of a human. So then the teachers then will dissect or have their students dissect a cat or a pig and use that, learning of the circulatory system then to compare it to a human circulatory system, for example. But the actual act of cutting apart an animal is never the course objective.
What can be really learned? I mean, you're fourth grade or fifth grade, or say you're even in high school biology, and you're cutting up these animals. Are there science teachers who really say, well, what a learning experience this is to cut up a cat or to cut up a salamander in my case? What does a student really learn from that?
Well, I would argue they learn, a very terrible lesson that animals are simply classroom tools like a piece of paper or a pencil to be used and discarded. So as far as educational efficacy, though, the modern alternatives are much better. Students perform better when they use them, and when you compare assessment with students who dissected animals versus students who use digital dissection or some other, modern method, they outperformed the students who dissected animals. So from an educational perspective, I would argue that there isn't zero benefit. And in fact, there's a detriment to having students dissect animals.
See, now that would be an interesting fact. If you could say something like, well, if people dissected versus people who didn't dissect, well, the people who didn't dissect, 80% of them all went to Harvard. And, the rest went to junior college. Now that might get people away from a dissection.
Well, and I think that it's part of our job is to get people to care about animals just in general. And I think that one of the hurdles that we face with an issue like animal dissection is that people argue, well, these animals were already dead. So they sort of, dismiss any animal rights or animal welfare concerns. But the fact is that the animals were living at one time, and many of them were specifically killed for classroom dissection. So that is, something that we always strive to, get that message out there to people who, again, may not even be aware that this is still an issue. Just, hey, animals are being killed for classroom dissection. This is not, just a harmless, quote unquote, activity.
Well, where do they get the bodies of these animals? I mean, they're killed specifically to be dissected, you're saying?
Many of them are. So rats and mice are bred specifically to be, either used in vivisection experiments or, used for classroom dissection. Frogs are specifically rounded up from their homes in the wild and killed for classroom dissection. Organs, such as sheep brains and cow eyes and etc. Those come from slaughterhouses, as we know, as do fetal pigs. They also come from slaughterhouses. And minks actually come from fur farms. So all the minks that you'll see commercially sold from, at biological supply companies, they are all skinned, which would indicate that they came from a fur farm.
Do you think the students gain any appreciation when they're actually touching a real animal versus, say, touching or using a computer model to learn?
That's a great question. I think that some teachers argue that there's nothing better than a hands-on approach. Well, Sindaver is a company that actually makes lifelike models of cats. So they just developed a new cat model. It's called the copycat, and it's created to mimic, actual tissue. So the tissue, the silicone tissue is actually wet, and students are able to physically dissect this cat and remove the organs and see everything, just as they would, an actual hands-on preserved cat. So, I would argue that even if teachers are very much married to the idea of having students touch something, and of course, if they're, kinesthetic learners in their classroom, they can use a model that's available instead of an actual, preserved cat who was once alive.
Well, I really don't buy the experiential thing in education. I mean, otherwise, if you want to teach the Civil War or World War II, you're going to give every student a gun and have them go out there and kill someone. I mean, really, it doesn't make sense. I mean, if I have no interest in being a doctor, no interest in being a scientist, to have the opportunity to touch a flatworm or to
to dissect the salamander. It doesn't make me want to be it doesn't encourage greater interest in scientists or in science, but does it? I mean, is that the argument that you become more in tune to science?
I've certainly heard that argument, but I love your anecdote about teaching the Civil War and similar topics of study. I think it's absolutely insane to teach biology, right? So the word has bio, which means life in it. It's insane to teach biology, the study of living organisms, with dead animals.
Yeah,
I find that absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead. You could use that, Sam. You could tell people to listen to the podcast, and then you could tell that story too. Because no, I mean, when I hear you say that that the teachers, the experience of it all. Well, I can see maybe going to France to learn how to speak French. That might be helpful. Going to Russia to learn to speak Russian, or China to speak Chinese. But biology to cut up an animal doesn't make sense. But especially with the technology. And are all the schools adopting the technology? I mean, are schools a percentage are more using these new technologies?
We definitely hear from schools all the time who are interested in ending animal dissection. There are tons of schools that we have donated software to. So we have an educational grant program at PETA, and any, teacher who contacts us, we will work with them to get, a software program or a set of, class models, some sort of modern, methods into their classroom so they can stop buying animals. We definitely see a trend moving toward humane non-animal methods in the classroom.
Are schools spending more money? Is it more costly to be, more, animal friendly to ban dissection and go to the technology? Is it something that would bust the budgets of a school?
Absolutely not. And in many cases, it can be cheaper. If you purchase one software, say for like a site license for the whole school, that can be used repeatedly year after year, as opposed to, buying a new supply of preserved animals annually, and not just one species, but oftentimes multiple species year after year, the scalpels, all of the safety equipment and everything that you have to purchase. So no, it's actually a cost savings.
And so where are we in the debate? It sounds like if we still need this education, we're not really too far along in ending the dissection companies who supply the animals and supply the tools and the schools that buy them. It sounds like they're kind of entrenched and they're not going anywhere. What's it going to take to change it all?
What I think will be very helpful is reaching teachers, especially the new teachers, just graduating from a program and, they begin student teaching and reaching them and sort of, getting to them before they are entrenched with, repeatedly purchasing animals and just basically signing a purchase form and be done with it every year. So we need to reach those teachers and explain to them that, the myriad opportunities to promote humane science education in the classroom instead of just defaulting to what hasn't changed in a century.
And what should students do? Say, you've got the outlier kid who wears the PETA t-shirt. Actually, I think there's more of them than not these days. But you have some kids who are very, they're eating, the Beyond Burger and that kind. They're becoming vegan. They're saying, why do I have to dissect these animals? Oh, I got to get a grade. They're going to flunk me. How does a student at a school stand up for their rights and say, that's it, I'm not going to do this? Can they call PETA and get help?
Yes, they can certainly reach out to us and we will help, reach out to the teacher. We'll offer, some options for, that the teacher could then use instead of, having a whole class dissect animals, and hopefully, encourage them to end the practice altogether. And also in many states, there are dissection choice laws and policies. So students have the right in several states in the U.S. to actually opt out and be offered, a humane alternative. So we would encourage, students to check out, PETA's website and see if their state has such a law or policy. And if not, get in touch with us.
Well, give me an example. What's the biggest state that has such a law and what's the biggest state that doesn't?
So California and Florida have the oldest dissection choice laws, and those two are quite awesome, quite lovely laws that were written, several decades back. And then I would probably say, so Michigan has a state board of education policy, but not a law, but that's also a really large state. And the state that I'm from, which is South Carolina, we do not have a law or a policy. So students in South Carolina are not able to opt out of animal dissection, by law.
But if they don't want to dissect, can they?
Yeah, if they don't want to dissect, I always encourage students to speak up, to have a conversation with their teacher. I understand that at certain ages, especially middle school and high school, students don't want to stand out or be different. They want to blend in and have friends, and that's it's very concerning to them to, speak out and embarrassing even perhaps, but just have a conversation with your teacher. Let them know that you're very ethically opposed to cutting apart an animal and, ask for an alternative.
They exist and they're better, and you don't have to flunk if you don't want to cut up an animal.
That's exactly right.
Samantha Suiter. Sam.
Yes.
Suiter. Thank you for your time. Say your title again.
Oh, Manager of Science Education.
This is a thing that's winnable, it appears. I mean, well, more than winnable, it's a thing it's not like some far-fetched thing. And morality and the animals, I mean, we have right on our side here on this issue.
That's exactly right. And even if people don't care about animals, even if they don't, they should care about students. And they should care about our future generations of, students being exposed to formaldehyde, which is carcinogenic, and also just having an apathy toward animals. Basically, that's it in a nutshell.
PETA is Samantha Suiter, the Manager of Science Education. She oversees all the work to try to end dissection in schools. You don't have to cut up an animal if you're a student. Contact Sam. Go to PETA.org and have PETA help you fight your battles in schools, if you're an educator, or if you're a student. Go to PETA.org. And that's our program. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog, or on amok.com. Hey, if you're in the D.C. area, July 20th through 28th, the Capitol Fringe is coming, and my one-man show, Emil Amok, will be there. I talk about PETA, and other things. Go to thecapitalfringe.com for more information. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. Thank you for listening. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.